Hello, friends. Welcome back. Tattooed Biker here with you. Tonight I've got something thrilling in store for you. We'll be diving into the mysterious world of the deep woods, exploring true experiences shared by our listeners. Get ready to be captivated with spine-tingling tales of unexplained occurrences that happened when they ventured into the unknown. If you're a fan of the unexplained or simply love a good mystery, you're in for a treat. So grab your flashlight and just kick back and enjoy the ride into our first chilling story. Submitted by Heather C. As a young child or teen, I had a very strange experience in the woods. I'm not sure if this encounter may have been some kind of entity or perhaps something different. I hope someone can give me more information about what happened to me and my friend. I was about 12 years old at the time, and one of my best friends, let's call him Alex here, must have been 10. Alex's father had purchased a large amount of forested land, about 100 kilometers away from the city we lived in, Montreal, Canada. It was all forest when Alex's family acquired it. They cleared a little patch to build a house, and the rest was pure, unadulterated forest. Their land was cut in two by a dirt road. If you followed it for several kilometers, led to a few houses. And their land was very different, depending on which side of the road you looked. On the right side, where their house was, the forest was light and luminous, or at least it felt that way. It wasn't too dense, with little rolling hills, a lovely place to play. On the left side of the road, though, it was a different story. First, there was a deep ditch, perhaps 2 meters deep, and then the hill became quite high and steep. Weirdly enough, all along the dirt road, the ditch was full of old car parts. A set of car wheels here, a door there, a steering wheel way over there, all old and overgrown with moss. And over the steep hill, the forest gave off a really bad vibe. It had lots of very tall, dark, coniferous trees, with almost black trunks. And the place seemed somehow devoid of light or life. Climbing the hill, which we seldom were willing to do because of the creeps it gave us, there was some sort of swamp there. When we went there was this strange pressure. We sensed a kind of animal instinct that told us to leave this place. The strange atmosphere was obvious to both me and Alex, and we playfully referred to that side of the road as the Demon's Forest. One weekend day, probably in 2001 or 2002, my family and I came to visit Alex's family. Bored by the adults, my friend and I decided to go and play in the forest. Alex's father told us to watch out. There was an animal that had been rummaging in their trash and causing a nuisance. He said it was a dog that looked like a Rottweiler, that surely belonged to someone living up the dirt road. He warned us that we shouldn't interact with the dog if we saw it, as it didn't look healthy, and as far as he could tell, it looked diseased or contagious. It had patches of fur missing. I can't remember exactly what he said. And so we set out on our walk. It was autumn, and the leaves were pretty and golden, many having already fallen to the ground. It was a calm, slightly overcast, windless day. The air was very still. Alex and I decided to walk along the dirt road, with the pleasant section of the forest to our right and the Demon's Forest to our left. We chatted while following the road as it was rising up a slope. As usual, we were slightly creeped out going up the road because of the weird vibes that the forest to the left side were giving off. But we were challenging ourselves to be brave and trying to not really think about how unsettling it felt. A good distance away from their home, when it was already well out of sight, I noticed the first strange thing of the day. Out of the steep hill on the left side of the road, there was a very large, dark pine tree hanging out over the road. Someone had attached a pink ribbon to one of the branches, which was already strange, since this was the territory of Alex's family, and they had no daughters or other little girls likely to hang around, or other people who might be owners of pink ribbons who were likely to hang out on this deserted road. The strange thing was, the ribbon was waving strongly in the wind. Its loose ends were flapping almost horizontally. The thing is, it was a completely windless day. There was no wind to speak of. The ribbon was within my reach, so I even touched it as it was waving. I even licked my finger and held it in the air to check if I could feel any wind or air current at all, as my dad had taught me. The air was perfectly still, yet the ribbon waved. I mentioned it to Alex. He seemed distracted and was younger than me and sometimes didn't catch on to what I said, so I didn't press the matter. We continued our climb. We reached a place where the hill on the left side of the road had a gentler slope and began further away from the road. In fact, it looked as if the hill was kind of carved out in a way that would have made it easy for us to climb and get into the demon's forest. It almost seemed as if the hill was carved in a sloping half circle like a theater, and the road we stood on would have been the stage. It gave us a very clear, treeless view of the hillside, full of golden and red fallen leaves. The trees began at the top of the hill, maybe 9 meters higher. We stopped to admire the view. Canadian autumns are a sight to behold. Alex suddenly got really excited. He thought he heard something in the demon woods up the hill, and he really wanted me to pay attention. He explained that there are wildcats in that forest. They had spotted them with his dad. One of them had reportedly had kittens. Kittens being one of the most exciting things in the world for kids our age, getting us all riled up. But somehow my hackles were up and I couldn't really relax, even thinking about adorable wild kittens. He actually thought he had heard the cat meow in the forest, up the hill close by. I heard nothing of the sort and thought he was inventing it. He suggested that we try meowing at it to see if it would respond. Maybe it would even bring its kittens along and we could see them and play with them, he said. I hadn't heard any sounds at all and didn't really like the idea of screaming meows into the creepy forest. What kind of cat would respond to human children anyway? Wouldn't it be obvious that we aren't cats by the sound of us? That seemed like a dumb idea to me. Before I could try and talk him out of it, he loudly meowed into the forest. To my utter shock, the forest meowed back. Alex was delighted and he meowed again. Something in the forest answered again. I was actually shocked. This didn't make sense to me and it creeped me out. But I suspended my disbelief to see what would happen. He kept doing the meowing over and over. For every one of his meows, there was one coming back in response from the woods. Something just felt off to me. Feral or wild animals didn't behave that way. Even at 12 years old, I realized that. And it wasn't an echo. The cat, or whatever it was, didn't bounce back any sound that we threw at it, except meows, which it reciprocated immediately. And anyway, there was no hard, rocky surfaces around off which the sound could bounce. Everything was covered in a soft layer of sound-dulling leaves. Alex got even more excited. Listen, the cat is coming towards us. She's coming to see us with her kittens. To my surprise, he was right. There was a rustle of dead leaves coming from above us, from above the slope in the creepy forest. It seemed like the rustling was getting closer. But it was way off. Because cats are small and light and careful with their steps, they don't make a ruckus when they walk through the woods. But here, the rustling leaf sound was extremely obvious, along with the meowing. And in fact, it sounded more like steps, like someone with 2 legs walking in the leaves. And it was getting closer to us. My alarm signals were all starting to go off with the wrongness of it all, while my younger friend was oblivious. He was calling it more urgently, noticing that it was coming towards us. Then I realized what seemed so wrong. The sound was coming towards us, but there was nothing to be seen. Right in front of us, we had the gently sloping hill, treeless and clearly visible. Anything coming from the forest should have been plainly exposed to our view. There was nothing. No source for the rustling sound, nothing moving. "Oh, her kittens are joining her. Listen, there are more sounds. They're coming to play with us." He was right. The walking sound seemed to have multiplied and now came from various directions all at once, ever getting closer, with still nothing being visible. Something was way off. I wanted to leave, but Alex was getting mad at me. The kittens were almost here, and he wanted to see them. He insisted. At this point, it was extremely tense, and the fight or flight was activating from the wrongness of it all. We were alone and quite exposed on this theater stage to whatever was getting closer to us, which was, more and more obviously with every moment, decidedly not kittens. I was on the verge of forcing him to run home. And then suddenly I heard a very loud, panting sound right at my feet. During the first millisecond, I got only mildly surprised. We had a huge husky at home. I was used to it panting next to my feet. But then a sense of profound dread dawned on me as I realized, obviously, my dog wasn't here, and it must be another dog, a very big one by the sound of it, right at my feet. I panicked and looked down, ready to jump away from the dog that somehow got extremely close to me, almost on top of me, without me noticing. Only there's nothing at my feet. But I still hear the sound. Breathing, panting, coming from there. I whirl around, screaming, where is it coming from? There's nothing at my feet or anywhere. There's nothing there, yet the sound was clear. As I whirl around in a frenzy, I look up the dirt road we were following. About 100 meters away, at the top of the slope, I see a lone dog standing. It looks somewhat similar to a Rottweiler, but in very, very bad shape. Extremely unkempt, with patches of fur missing, shaggy and dirty, with some skin exposed where the fur was missing. And it's looking at us, too. Obviously, there's no way I could hear it panting at that distance, and the sound of it is right at my feet. At this point, the flight instinct wins. I've never run as fast and desperately as in my whole life. Thank God it was all downhill. Alex kept pace right beside of me, terrified. We made it home in one piece, and we didn't walk in those woods anymore. I came back to Alex's place several times in my life. I never wanted to walk in the woods again, though. We had some amazing parties at his house as teens. I was often there rather drunk and having a great time, but I always had this very stressful sensation when I went out of his house, especially at night. When I slept over there, I had these extremely strange experiences where I woke up and sensed as if something was there and watching me. In my mid-awake state, I even saw something floating once near the ceiling. I had the sensation that it wasn't an immediate threat, though it was just observing. I'm not sure that whatever this was related to what happened on the road. We never discussed what happened that day, and as I research it now, I see that this land is historically Algonquin land, although one source said Mohawk. If anyone can help clarify what happened, I would be very thankful. Wow, that was an incredible account. Thanks, Heather, for sharing that with us. But that's not all. Brace yourselves for the second hair-raising tale. Number 2, submitted by Amber B. My husband and I spent the night way out in the northern woods near a lake once. There's a looped camping trail where you can rent a site out for a few days for a relatively cheap price. Each side is probably separated by 70 to 80 meters, so while you can somewhat see and hear your fellow campers, it's never enough to take away from the ambience. Once we've set up our tent and gotten our belongings in order, we decided to get a fire going and have our usual go-to outdoors dinner of roasted hot dogs. The night was beautiful and the fire gave off the perfect amount of heat and didn't smoke in our faces at all. And for the most part, our neighbors didn't get too boisterous. By quiet hours, we bedded down and got into our tent to spend some time, enjoying the serenity and peace until I realized for some reason our tent is sweating from the inside. And then it started raining. Hard. We take our valuables to the car immediately and get inside to wait out the weather before disassembling the tent. Our nearby neighbors all realize the weather situation as well, and we see them pack up and ship out one by one, leaving us very much alone. This is where it gets strange, and to this day, neither of us are quite sure what we experience. Out in the distance, beyond our sight, I see what appears to be a red light, maybe attached to a lantern. However, this light moves as completely inorganic. It doesn't sway or bob as if being held by a human who's walking around. Rather, it snakes around in a perfect track, and it slowly comes closer and closer to our car. By this time, we've killed the headlights and are just staring at the spectacle, with a mixture of awe and horror. My husband gets out of the car at some point and calls out into the rain to see if anyone's there. Lo and behold, the light disappears. This left a most bewildering and eerie feeling deep in my gut. Something didn't feel right at all. The sixth sense was tingling and everything. At my urging, he gets back in the car, and it doesn't take long for the light to reappear. By this point, I'm ready to leave. Tent be damned. But my husband insists that if we're to leave, we have to pack up our tent because he doesn't want it stolen. So I begrudgingly oblige, and while he stands to watch the flashlight, I get to work packing us up. I probably got it done in 5 minutes, maybe less. The entire time we were out there, we didn't see the red light. If we had, God, I don't know how I would have reacted, but I'm glad we were able to get our stuff and finally leave. Absolutely bizarre, Amber. Thanks for sharing. Now prepare yourself for the final twist as we delve into our final story of the night. Number 3, submitted by Jake T. from Central Idaho. In many rural areas of the American West, cutting firewood is a necessary chore if you want a warm house through the winter. Our home in mountainous Central Idaho was no exception. It was normal for my dad to pick me and my brothers up after school and head into the mountains for an afternoon of firewood gathering. My dad would fell the trees, then saw them into chunks. My brothers and I had the task of rolling the wood to the truck and loading it. We would continue this assembly line process until we had a truckload, usually before nightfall. Hot, sweaty, and exhausted, we would pile into the truck cab and make our way down the mountain. At home the next day, we would unload and split the wood and stack it into neat little rows. This process was repeated until we had a winter's worth of fuel for our house, our grandma's cabin, and any extra for elderly neighbors. This particular afternoon, we decided to try a different logging road on the other side of the valley. This was well outside our familiar logging area. No real reason for the change, but my dad said he wanted a change of scenery. This logging road hadn't been maintained in some time. Large rocks and fallen branches littered the path. My brothers and I had to walk out in front, pushing rocks and wood out of the way as my dad lurched the truck up the switchbacks. Yard by yard, we slowly made our way up the mountain. That hike was physically brutal as we ascended the mountain and got farther into the trees. This odd feeling started to set in. I wasn't sure if it was the exhaustion from the hike or something more. There was electricity in the air, like the whole mountain was buzzing at a wavelength just below my senses. In some odd way, it felt like the mountain knew we were there, and it wasn't welcome to that fact. I wanted to say something to my brothers, but before I opened my mouth, my younger brother said, "Does anyone else feel like we're not welcome here?" My older brother and I stopped in our tracks and looked back at him. Both of us nodded in agreement. This moment was broken by my dad honking and motioning us to continue clearing the path. Reluctantly, we pushed forward to a small clearing in the woods where we finally stopped the truck. My dad, oblivious to our apprehension, or simply choosing to ignore it, grabbed his saw and went to work. As the wood was felled and loaded, I couldn't shake this feeling enveloping me like a dark shroud. I noticed my brothers were taking occasional glances over their shoulders as we worked. Everyone, but my dad it seemed, was on edge. The sun nestled down into the trees and twilight began to set in. As the light drained from the sky, my anxiety only intensified. It wasn't until my dad told us to load up that a wave of relief flooded over me. I could see the tension in my brothers melt away as well. The truck wasn't fully loaded, an oddity. Getting a half load was a waste, according to my dad. We would sometimes work into the dark just to make sure the truck was full. But tonight he seemed eager to head home. With everything loaded, we started down the road. Although dead tired, everyone seemed to be in a much lighter mood. We were chatting and cracking jokes while trying to blow off steam from the afternoon. We were almost out of the tree line and into the valley desert. Going down the switchbacks, you want to be careful, especially with a load, even if it was a half load. A brown blur jumped out from down the slope side of the switchback. "Shit!" was the only word that came from my dad's mouth as he slammed on the brakes. Loaded with wood and traveling downhill, there was no way to avoid smashing into the blur. The truck finally ground to a standstill. The four of us peered through the windshield. Nobody was saying a word. Illuminated in the night glow of our headlights was a crumpled body of a deer. Grumbling and cursing the deer's existence, my dad exited the truck to investigate. Doing as they were told, my brothers stayed put in the truck, but I didn't listen. I followed close behind my dad. The truck was fine. We hadn't been traveling fast when we smacked the deer. Just some blood and hair in the grill. Hitting a deer really wasn't that unusual. The mountains were full of them. What was unusual was that the deer dropped so quickly. At faster speeds, deer could be upright and sprinting away just to die in the woods after a collision. That last burst of an adrenaline dump, this one fell over like a rag doll. Before even approaching the carcass, a deep, foul smell hit us. Deer smell bad when they're alive, but this was on a whole other level. It was the smell of decay and rot. My stomach began to turn as we got closer. My nostrils were burning. Coming up on the deer, it was clearly dead. I mean, really, really dead. The stench was so overwhelming my eyes were watering. And the body was a true horror scene. The deer's eyes were gone, replaced with a sunken yellow hole. As if to overcompensate for their absence, the tongue was swollen and black as coal. It couldn't be contained and hung out the side of its mouth. The underbelly was split open. Entrails and offals spilled into the dirt. In the dim headlights, it looked as though the deer's fur and viscera were moving, wiggling almost. Holding my breath, I bent down for a closer look and my heart stopped. The deer, inside and out, was covered in maggots. It was dead all right, but our truck didn't kill it. Clearly, it had been dead for days, if not weeks. I backed away, retching. That electric anxiety came screaming back. My dad was always the quiet, stoic type, but right now, even in the dim headlights of the truck, I could see the horror in his face. His gaze wasn't on the deer, but focused down the mountain. Poorly masking the fear in his voice, he told me to firmly walk back to the truck and get inside. I obeyed without objection. As I grabbed the door handle, a loud shriek came out of the trees. Branches were shattering and breaking. Something was headed up the slope at us. I slammed my door closed just as my dad reached the truck. Before his door was shut, he pressed in the accelerator. The truck launched forward, sending us over the deer carcass and racing down the hill. With me and my brothers yelling, it was hard to tell if the shrieking was following us. Our truck popped out of the tree line and into the sagebrush. Once out of the woods, everything quieted down. We were left with only the rumble of the engine and the wind through the half-open windows. Pulling into our property, the truck came to a stop, and we all just sat in silence. No one moved to leave the truck. Everyone started talking at once. We all had questions. What was the screaming? How does a dead deer jump uphill in front of the truck? There was no way the truck killed it. Dad just shook his head and motioned for us to quieten down. That deer was dead when we hit it. It didn't jump out in front of us. It was thrown at us, and we stared at it. He explained that all the way up the mountain he felt uneasy. Not wanting to worry us boys, he kept it to himself. He described it like walking into a stranger's living room while they were upstairs asleep. That feeling never left him, and as twilight came, he happened to catch a shadow in the corner of his eye. Not far into the woods, he saw figures moving from tree to tree. He couldn't focus on them long enough to get a good look before they dodged. His stomach dropped. Working hard to keep his composure, he had hurried us to the truck to leave. It was after hitting the deer and discovering it was long dead that my dad pieced together what was happening. Something threw that deer to get us to stop. Before the shrieking began, he could hear something moving in the darkness beyond the road. It was a trap. Running back to the truck could have started an ambush or triggered a prey dive. So we walked back to the truck. The second we were inside, he drove that truck downhill with no intention of stopping for anyone or anything. That feeling of electricity didn't disappear until we hit the country highway. My brothers and I never saw anything as we drove away, but those screams from the forest will never leave my mind. We didn't gather firewood the rest of the season. For the first time in his life, my dad just bought what we needed. And although we started to gather wood again the next season, we've never been back to that particular mountain. The Forest Service has permanently closed and reclaimed that road. The only way back up into those woods was a long hike, one that I'm never taking. Whatever was on that mountain, whatever threw that deer carcass, whatever chased us out of those woods, it didn't want us there. It wanted us gone. Or worse, it wanted us dead. Thanks for sharing, Jake. And there it is, all I have for tonight. These experiences are enough to make anyone question what lies within the depths of the woods. Let me know in the comments if you've had any eerie encounters in the wilderness. Don't forget to hit that like button and consider subscribing if you haven't already. It's completely free and it really helps out the channel. So as always, thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay safe, stay vigilant, and I'll be seeing you on down the road. Biker out.